Welcome to World History LOL, a series of 101 slides where I describe the story of everything using a logarithmic time scale. I'm using a base 10 magnitude and a coefficient of 5 to define each primary period, then marking both the median and the upper tertiary divisions at 2.5 and 1.5 respectively. For each magnitude on a scale of 1 to 10, the next lower magnitude would be 10% smaller. It's an interesting formula because research data all seems to fit very nicely, better than using a straight factor of 10 without a coefficient. Let's begin world history with the formation of the planet less than 5 billion years ago. That's 5 times 10 to the 9 years ago, or a magnitude of 9. As we look back on Earth history, 5 billion years really isn't that long ago, is it? Anything prior to Earth formation is really the subject of cosmology, including the Big Bang, the origin of the singularity, all that physics stuff. It wasn't until the tail end, after 90% of all of Earth history, that the Cambrian explosion first brought complex life forms into being around 500 million years ago. Then at 66 million years ago, an extinction event ended the dinosaurs, and thus began the Cenozoic era, or the age of mammals. It was around 5 million years ago that the first hominins began to arrive at the beginning of the Pleistocene. And it wasn't until less than 500,000 years ago that Neanderthals and other archaic humans began to stomp on the Terra. The Neolithic migration began around 50K, eventually spreading to every continent, reaching the Americas some 13,000 years ago. Civilization itself is only 5,000 years ago, with ancient history covering both the Bronze and Iron Ages. Modern history only begins about 500 years ago with the Age of Discovery. And anything since 1950 can be viewed as contemporary, or a magnitude 1 on the time scale. Each magnitude is a full jump of 10 from the previous level, allowing us to squeeze all of time in existence into a nice little 10-bracket logarithmic scale. Are we having fun so far? How about we get into some detail? This is an artist's depiction of what I call the Earth marshmallow, cooling in the void less than 5 billion years ago. On this time scale, we are here, and Earth formed on the other side of this little bar here. Anything beyond this period is the subject of cosmology and physics, which is way beyond my pay grade. The standard model of the universe is the Big Bang and cosmic inflation model that puts existence itself at 13 billion years. Apparently, something called the singularity was formed around 25 billion years ago, out of which the universe and later the Earth were formed. But we should admit, existence of a 10th magnitude event is really the subject of complete speculation, yours and mine. I've always thought it might be a pulse of some kind, but I had assumed that the universe was decelerating and would eventually collapse. But now they say it's accelerating, so I just don't know. Therefore, aliens. What do you think of cosmology? Leave your comments below. Earth formation is currently dated at less than 5 billion years ago. Water appeared early on, flooding the planet in a ferrous green color. The first half of Earth history is currently called the Hadean and Archean eons, where anaerobic single-celled life came to fill the oceans, that may or may not have given them a purple hue. Then about halfway in, cyanobacteria emerged, using photosynthesis to generate our oxygen atmosphere, and leading to the great rusting of the oceans that created the banded iron deposits we mine today. It wasn't until the upper tertiary period of Earth history, that sounds cool, doesn't it? The upper third of all geologic time, that multicellular life appeared in the oceans of a water world Earth. But the planet continued to cool, eventually having ice problems, and possibly some biochemical imbalances that we really shouldn't talk about here. Which leads us to the Cambrian explosion, with its trilobites and other creepy crawlies of the Phanerozoic. Now, it may or may not have started with this snowball Earth thing, but the vast bloom of complex life some 500 million years ago is already referred to as the Phanerozoic. I know it's a dumb word, but we're stuck with it. The first half of this period was the Paleozoic, an age of fish, amphibians, plants, and bugs, their fossil record preserved in coal deposits and ancient sedimentary formations across the planet. Then came the Permian extinction, caused by the PTR extinction event, which coincides with the massive geologic upheaval of the Siberian traps around 250 million years ago. The age of dinosaurs began with the Triassic, then came the Jurassic, and about halfway through the Mesozoic is the Cretaceous, all of which came to an abrupt halt about 66 million years ago because, you know why. They call it the KPG boundary, and it begins the Cenozoic era. Continental drift also started around this time, according to the USGS dating of the ocean floor. The age of dinosaurs had passed, and the age of mammals had begun. Now, the Cenozoic may or may not have started by this dinosaur doomsday comet thing. Records show Earth heated for a bit, and then started to cool off from about 50 million years ago. Mammals were adapting to the cooler climates, and they were getting bigger. What's now called the Paleogene represents the first half of the Cenozoic, a time when land mammals rose and became dominant throughout the world. A genetic split of our human ancestors from apes occurred well over 25 million years ago, although I've met a few that make me wonder. All sorts of new critters appeared during this Miocene epoch, including hell pigs, saber-toothed tigers, and terror birds. But it wasn't until the Pliocene that hominins, and later archaic humans of the early Stone Age, would spread throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa. Now, the Pliopleistocene may or may not have started by a sharp drop in global temperature. Looking back from today back to 5 million years ago, the entire first half of that is called the Pliocene, a period of global cooling at the tail end of the Cenozoic. New creatures, like bison and elephants, roamed in herds in a familiar National Geographic fashion. But winter was coming, and it seemed like it might last forever. The Pleistocene, also known as the Ice Age, was itself a geophysical event, starting with the Huronian glaciation around 2.4 million years ago. Various species of hominins first appeared and lived throughout the Pliocene for several million years, eventually giving rise to the genus Homo in the example of Australopithecus at the start of the Pleistocene. This is currently known as the Lower Paleolithic, or the Early Stone Age, before modern human beings came to exist. Then about 1.5 million years ago, Homo erectus appeared, spreading throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa, but disappearing sometime during the Paleolithic as new species emerged. Neanderthals, the first archaic humans, appeared less than 500,000 years ago, appearing in the archaeological evidence throughout Europe, Asia, and the Levant. Neanderthals controlled fire, cooked food, crafted tools, weapons, and clothing, and possibly made the first boats. Our species, Homo sapien, may or may not have appeared about halfway into the Paleolithic, as we have yet to find corroborating evidence of this missing link. At this time in history, human beings just weren't the biggest critters out there. We were still climbing the food chain. We used tools, hunted, and we lived somewhat as the Neanderthals did, although humans are genetically separate from them by around 98%. The final glacial episode began around 150,000 years ago during the Middle Paleolithic, with ice sheets pressing down on Neanderthal habitats, possibly causing a southward migration, but that's my own speculation. Humanity would soon press back as the Neolithic migration began. Now, it may or may not have been some 50,000 years ago that human beings set out to conquer the planet. Our prehistoric ancestors took on massive creatures and dangerous beasts in an endless fight for survival. The great Neolithic migration spread humanity to every continent as human tribes of hunter-gatherers followed the herds and fished the coastlines. The extinction of the Neanderthals coincides with the last glacial maximum of the Pleistocene around 25,000 years ago. Humans continued to spread throughout the Mesolithic period, arriving in the Americas less than 14,000 years ago, which also coincides with the Neolithic Revolution at around 15K. This was the first indication of sedentary farming, animal domestication, and tribal settlement that marked the beginning of the Holocene epoch. The first builders appeared during the Holocene, giving rise to various proto-civilizations from Britain to Mesopotamia to the Americas. But the first true civilizations, with permanent militaries and trade networks, didn't appear until some 5,000 years ago with the start of the Bronze Age. And that's all the longer human civilization has been around, about 5,000 years. The first agrarian states laid claim to agricultural lands and resources, secured by the first militaries and dynastic god kings. The Bronze Age accounts for fully half of civilized history, and it's a fascinating study in of itself. Now, the great Bronze Age collapse may or may not have been the result of the Sea Peoples, but it certainly led to a dark age of about 300 years from which the Iron Age would emerge. This second wave of civilization ran from Cyrus the Great to Alexander to the Roman Empire, together an Iron Age spanning over 1,000 years. Then came the fall of Rome and the beginning of a second dark age that also lasted 1,000 years. It wasn't until 500 years ago that the rules changed, technology took off, and civilization began its third enlightenment. Now, modern history may or may not have begun in 1492 with the discovery of America and the Age of Sail. The first half of modern history is referred to as the Classical period, which coincides with the Reformation, the printing press, and the introduction of gunpowder to European politics. Steam engines were eventually conceived, and the first factories appeared around 1750. The Age of Enlightenment began with the emergence of the United States, followed by a quarter century of the Napoleonic era. By 1850, the Industrial Revolution had spread to the world, giving rise to what we currently consider the modern age. All of World War I, the interwar period, and World War II happened within a short span of 31 years, after which we consider post-war civilization to be a contemporary period that loosely coincides with living memory. Call it the nuclear age, call it the space age, call it the age of freaking Aquarius. It doesn't matter. These are interesting times, and we're on the verge of something, I'm sure. This is an actual photo of Earth from Apollo 17. Today there are 7 billion souls on the planet, and nobody really knows what's going to happen next. And with that, how about some inspirational quotes and we can break for lunch? Thanks for watching.